ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Chair and judges, and opposition of course. I'm the first speaker for the proposition of this debate. This House believes by the year 2025 it will be clear that independence is beneficial for the majority of Scots. I will be focusing my arguments on the economic issues, while my fellow speaker Anna will talk about the international ones, and our third speaker Ethan will address the social issues, followed by the debate's points of clash and why overall the proposition will win this debate. Firstly, however, I would like to define the motion. We believe the motion is where most people, more than half, of those living and working in an independent Scotland, where we can make our own decisions, independent from England and the rest of the UK, are leading better lives in terms of employment, income and education, for example, than they were as previously part of the UK. As I've said previously, the topic of my debate will be the economy, and how through independence it will have proven beneficial for Scotland. But first I'm going to talk about currency. Scotland's currency has been a major talking point in the independence debate. However, I am here to tell you why all the drama will turn out fine in the end. We believe that it will be agreed that if Scotland wants to remove Trident, which we most certainly do, we cannot keep the British pound. We think that this is fair to phase it out over two political terms, changing to our own currency, the Scottish pound. This will be achieved just after 2025, so for terms of this debate we will still have the British pound. By keeping the same currency as the UK for this length of time, it will make it easier to deal with the national debt, which the UK most certainly want. Well, thank you. And invoice transaction costs for this crucial period of time. However, this will help us to bypass the catastrophe that is the euro, due to its track record, and we will believe that this will please the German taxpayer. Debt. There is an argument that
information. You're the ones observed that impossible to predict the future is. Is this not based on speculation with no actual evidence?
Good point, however, I will address it in my speech. There's an argument, that's a debt anyway, there's an argument that Scotland may not be able to pay her fair share of the UK's debt, and we believe that this is not going to be the case, due to our many industries, which I will talk about later, and good international relations that will have encouraged trade for an international Scotland, an independent Scotland, sorry. We'll also immediately be able to pay our valued share of the debt, which will be reduced to £102 billion within a year of independence, which is estimated by Louise Armistead from the Telegraph, which is very interesting because it comes from a Better Together campaign. And even the BBC believe this to be the case, stating that the Treasury in London would not have to pay the interest on that borrowing, which makes it attractive for them and quicker and fairer for us to deal with the national debt. Unemployment then. In March this year, unemployment rates were recorded at the lowest they have been for a 5-year period, at 6.4%, while the rest of the UK are stuck on 7.1%, considerably higher. Scotland's youth unemployment rate is also lower compared to the rest of the UK, and we believe that this is just a taster for things to come. There is huge potential to develop our energy sector. A combination of both renewables and oil and gas will provide many job opportunities in this sector. And a development of oil exploration, no thank you, a development in oil exploration in the south-west will bring opportunities to every sector, not just energy. The Scottish Government will foresee this and will offer more apprenticeships and job opportunities by giving companies incentives like reduced tax rates. And our sovereign fund, which we'll talk about later, will support this. So, oil and gas then has caused havoc in the debate for the independence referendum. There's been so much dispute of whether we'll run out or whether we don't have enough to sustain ourselves. And the conditions of Scotland's oil, however, are being hidden, as they were in the 1980s by the Ministry of Defence, to protect the existence of Trident. And they say that they won't have access to it. But we know that this isn't the case because the USA will be willing to take on Trident for a short period of time, until a home in the UK can be built. This is according to the Herald, who quote that many senior Conservative MPs, like David Mundell, are supportive of Trident's removal because they know that's what the Scottish people want. Many argue that Scotland will benefit hugely from this and it will benefit our whole economy. And our sovereign fund, on top of that, which we estimate will be at £150 billion, based on the Norwegian model, who have £600 billion in 2014. And we will spend 3% per annum on stocks and real estate, for example, which will generate a sizable amount for other sectors. And this is on top of our increasing renewable energy sector because of our demand from Europe, which because we can support and serve 25% of all of Europe's wind and tidal energy. So I've told you all about the economic issues today, and thank you for listening to my debate and I hope that you support the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Now, judges, by 2025 we will see an independent Scotland in which we'll not have a heart and a soul as we have today. This is because, as we all know, that the only people left will be gingers, and, well, gingers don't have souls. Now, of course, this is a joke, but we do not know what independence will bring. And we do know what the Union will bring by 2025. And the resulting instability from independence will not be beneficial for the most of Scots. I will be looking at this in my speech by looking at why large economies tend to be more stable, and two, why instability will result in less, not more, self-determination for Scots. But first, I wish to bring in some rebuttal on the first proposition, in which talked about the currency. But she talked about how we will be bringing in Scottish pound. However, how will we get into the EU with Scottish pound when they in fact are wanting to have the euro within Scotland? Secondly, the point about unemployment. How can we actually change the unemployment without capital? So firstly, Mr. Chair, on to my first point, about the benefits of a large economy. The international economic meltdown has left key lessons. Stability is the best quality for a strong economy, and large economies have far more stability than smaller ones. Large economies, like the UK, are more stable. They provide more stability in areas such as public spending. Smaller economies get hit a lot harder by a crisis, and although they may recover quicker, they tend to stagnate a lot more. Just look at Iceland and Ireland. Their economies suffered from the 2008 crisis worse than most, because they could borrow money needed to bail out their financial institutions. In turn, public spending was slashed to a far greater extent than the UK's. In the first 10 years, there are not a lot of new Scottish services that will need to be set up that are funded by public spending. No one knows what the international economy will be like in 2025, but in the 21st century, resilience and stability were far more valuable assets from an economy than flexibility and inconsistency. In short, when put into context of the economic crisis of 2008 and the unknown future of an international economy, it is far safer and secure to be part of a larger and more integrated economy like the UK, and that is why larger economies are better than smaller ones. So on to my second point. By 2025, the majority of Scots will realise that independence offers less determination than being within the Union. Self-determination is the ability to help yourself in democratic decision-making. Under the Union, we knew which powers were controlled in Edinburgh and which in London. The Scots still had a say in the decision made...
Point of information?
No, thank you. The Scots still had a say in the decisions made in London because they sent MPs to Westminster Parliament. IPSET decisions involved the Scottish people. By 2025, Scotland's economic policies will be decided by international bankers rather than the people. This is because small nations are unable to exert the same amount of power over their economies and tax base as large ones. Taxes increased as Scotland has fewer working people per head of population. That was the only way the country could pay for the welfare measures the Yes campaign promised. The irony was that reducing the amount of tax revenue as wealthy taxpayers left the country. Ireland is a perfect example of where Scotland will be in 2025. It is a small Celtic nation dependent on a handful of industries. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? As a small nation, it was unable to negotiate the terms of its loans, and soon enough, its public sector workers found themselves with 10% pay cuts. We can't assume that independence is going to meet policies matched in the white paper Scotland's future. We can't even assume that we will have bus passes or free prescriptions that we have now. An independent Scotland will have to take the economic decisions that lenders imposes on it. There is a far less self-determination in that than in sending MPs to Westminster. So what have I told you today? By 2025, Scotland will be economically unstable. This will lead to a larger democratic deficit than the one that we see today. Mike Barkner, Mr Muir, will go on to demonstrate that Scotland will be weaker abroad and socially. Thank you.
Good evening, ladies, gentlemen, chair and opposition. I'm Anna and I'll be the second speaker for the proposition. I will be discussing Scotland's place in the world following independence, and my main points will be around EU membership, immigration and NATO. Before Ethan, our final speaker, will look at some social issues and tackle the points of clash. So my first point, Scotland's place in the EU. As part of the UK, Scotland has been a member of the European Union since 1973, so it's clear that, as a country, we do meet all the requirements for entry. Scotland's huge energy and fishing resources mean that it would be in the interest of the rest of the EU for our membership to continue seamlessly. It's been estimated, and pointed out by my colleague Becca, that Scotland could potentially provide up to 25% of the EU's wind and tidal energy, which would be a phenomenal source of income and would make us a very attractive candidate. Prior to independence, we will not know the exact terms and restrictions that Scotland's membership would have, and discussions about these could begin to take place in the 18 months transition period following a yes vote. However, by the year 2025, we are confident that Scotland will have full membership of the EU. Becoming a member of the EU is something that we believe is vital for an independent Scotland. It provides safety and security, as well as allowing us to remain a member of the largest single market in the world. It is this that allows Scottish firms to trade with a vast multitude of international firms and hugely increase potential customers for Scottish businesses. However, Scotland is already a member of the EU, so why is it essential that we get membership as an independent member state? This comes down to mainly representation. Scotland is currently represented by a meagre 6 MEPs at Brussels. This is the same number as Malta, a country with a population of only 400,000 compared to our 5 million. With independence, Scotland's representation in Brussels would double to 12 MEPs. This would boost the prominence of Scotland on the world stage and would allow us the opportunity to represent ourselves at an international level, rather than being grossly underrepresented as a mere region of the
Point of
UK.
information. Do you not accept that by 2025, Scotland's international influence will be but a whisper compared to its current international influence translated by the UK?
We believe that Scotland will be representing its own values rather than the values of the rest of the UK.
Supplementary.
No, thank you. This increased representation at EU level will allow Scotland to directly influence policies, keeping Scotland's interests at heart. For example, an EU policy which directly affects one of Scotland's leading exports is the Common Fisheries Policy, which we would not only be a part of, but we would also have full involvement in negotiations surrounding this policy on Scotland's behalf rather than as a part of the UK. It is also important for Scotland to become an independent nation at this time in terms of EU membership. David Cameron has proposed a referendum on the UK's membership. Such revelations mean that by 2025, Scotland may have left the EU with the UK should we choose to remain part of the Union. Going independent means that Scotland is in a better position to control its own international relations. Another thing that Scotland will be able to control for itself is immigration. Although, should we become an EU member, other EU citizens would gain easy access to life in Scotland, we do not see this as a huge problem. Scotland suffers from an ageing population far more than England, and as a result, we will begin to struggle to support our elderly residents with a lack of working people. This is why immigration is important. As an independent country, Scotland will be able to strongly advertise its many assets and draw in many younger working people. With independence, Scotland could introduce a point system of controlled immigration, like that of Australia or United States, for people out with the EU. This would allow us to bring trained, experienced workers into our country. No, thank you. In an attempt to tackle and overcome the problems of an ageing population. By 2025, we could have made a start on this. On to my last point. NATO. Portugal, which is a founding member of NATO, has never had nuclear weapons, and Germany, another NATO member, has had no participation in the intervention in Libya in 2011. So Scotland will be able to have an independent foreign policy, be a nuclear-free state, and still be a member of NATO. I have been the second speaker for the proposition and have discussed Scotland's place in the world following independence. By the year 2025, we are confident that Scotland will be a full EU member, we will be utilising immigration in an attempt to tackle problems of an ageing population, and we will be representing ourselves in both NATO and the UN. For all these reasons and more, I urge you to propose the motion. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, it's 2025 and Scotland's new currency is the deep-fried Mars bar. Nicola Sturgeon is excited. She's about to draw her pension for the first time, but she can't, because her partner in crime, King Salmon, has destroyed the last of Scotland's pension funds. Future sketches for the privatised site. I should present two key points to this debate. I'll first of all look at why Scotland will be disadvantaged internationally, and second of all, why it will be socially disadvantaged. But before I move on to my substantive case, I must address the issues presented by the Honourable Lady sitting opposite. So, first of all, we heard a lot about the economy, and we heard different bits and bobs. And so, first of all, on to the concept of nuclear energy, which we firmly support the growth of. We believe it will be more economically viable for Scotland if the costs, which are, again, unknown, if the costs of renewable energies are spread across the whole of the UK instead of just Scotland, that would benefit the Scottish taxpayer who paid for this nuclear energy. No, nuclear energy? Renewable energy. No, thank you. She then mentioned oil, and to this we say that oil is running out, and it is forcing us to go to areas such as fracking and deep-sea drilling. This will harm Scotland's oceans. No, thank you. It will harm us socially, but also the reality is that oil is running out. And although it might be there by 2025, we don't know when it will run out. It's not a continuous source. EU membership, ladies and gentlemen, we believe that it contradicts her point about immigration because the EU has its own regulations on immigration. And so her points that we'll be allowed to welcome so have our own immigration system is actually a paradox or a point about the EU. And finally, NATO, ladies and gentlemen, well, the reality is the SNP decreed the White Paper that it will allow NATO atomic bombs into this country, destroying her point about it being a nuclear-free country, destroying its
Confirmation.
No, thank you. It is hypocrisy. We don't believe it can stand. And so, now let me move on to my first point, why Scotland will be better internationally. So, first of all, Scotland enjoys a position as a fixed-seat member of the UN Security Council. We believe this is beneficial for Scotland because the UN Security Council aims to preserve human rights, to prevent conflict, to ensure diplomatic solutions to conflict, and also to protect democracy from abroad. Scotland should share those goals, but as I said earlier in the point of information, the fact is it will have a much smaller international influence if we leave the Union, and we believe that if Scotland was to pursue those goals, it's far more efficient for us to do so on the UN Security Council in the UK. That's about embassies. Embassies are important because they have treaties which relate to trading. No, thank you. And trading, we believe, the reality is that by going it alone, we have to renegotiate on these treaties. If Scotland is left short-handed, then it could get a worse deal, which affects the Scottish taxpayer having to pay more taxes and means that Scotland's inward investment economy could suffer, ladies and gentlemen. Finally, the G8. We believe that the G8 is important because it has international connections. It allows you to get to the top of the international community. Scotland walks out of the G8, means we lose international connections, which means we lose international influence, which again ties into the fact that for an inward investment economy to prosper, you need international influence. You need to be able to have good relationships with other countries. And we believe that will be hampered, as well as the other points I've mentioned, by leaving the UK. Scotland is stronger internationally if we stay together. Now let me move on to my second point now, about social benefits for Scotland. So the reality is that your national identity could be Scottish, it could be British, it could be a duality of both. And we believe this is a good thing. But the problem with the referendum is the polls are so narrow. Most referendums have an evident mandate to be held with a clear majority. South Sudan, for example, had 98% majority in favour of yes, whereas according to polls, a yes vote for Scotland, you'd only get, say, a 55% majority maximum. Now, you uni students are going to love this, because this is what John Stuart Mill thinks we call the tyranny of the majority.
What information?
You're out of time, sorry. Where the reality is, because there's a marginal majority in favour of yes, that alleges taking away the culture of millions of Scottish people and destroying their national identity, as well as the national identity who was born in Scotland, proud to be Scottish, who have moved south of the border for work and family, that won't get a say whether their home country becomes a foreign one. It's a disgrace. It makes the democracy quite rich, if you ask me. But why is this hard in Scotland? Because you can't start a new country on a 55% majority, ladies and gentlemen. They require patriotism, loyalty, patience. And what incentive is there, ladies and gentlemen, for someone who's been wrong with their culture to be loyal? What loyalty will be shown by those who have families south of the border? What, ladies and gentlemen, what patience will be shown by those who've had their financial security put at risk? None at all, ladies and gentlemen. This motion alienates people from their culture, from their finances. So for the reasons I've mentioned, about the international and social benefits, Harbour Draft, and Mr. Booth's points, we urge you to reject the motion.
Ladies, gentlemen, opposition, judges. Who am I? Why am I here? This House believes that by the year 2025, it will be clear that independence has been beneficial for the majority of Scots. I'm here to A, sum up the arguments for the proposition, B, show how the proposition has won and the points clash, and C, talk about the social benefits of independence, specifically on the issue of pensions and the National Health Service. First of all, on the issue of pensions, of course, very important issue. Your state pension will be paid in the same way, but simply by the Scottish Government rather than Westminster. And our policy on pensions will largely be in line with the rest of the UK. We plan on raising the retiring age to 66 in 2020, while the UK plans to raise it to 67 in 2028. And as we move forward, independence will offer the opportunity to make improvements based on the needs and priorities of the Scottish people, based on policies they vote for. Private sector pensions will continue to operate as before under the Royal...
Point of information. Do you not think that Scotland's economy being controlled by people from the EU will mean that Scotland won't be able to decide how much it's going to be paying people its pension?
Well, we'll be allowed to have a separate policy on pensions, just as the UK is currently allowed to have a separate policy from the EU. And if Mr. Jean-Claude Juncker is defeated, which at this point is too soon to say, if he is defeated, it's quite possibly that that will remain the same. Also, the income of pensioners will be protected by the so-called triple lock. So pensions will increase. They're currently at £113.10 for single pensioners, double that for couples. They'll increase either by inflation, earnings, or 2.5%, whichever is highest. Now, my second point on the NHS. A yes vote, because it's already devolved to Scotland, a yes vote, and let me be very, very clear about this, a yes vote will not affect the day-to-day running of our NHS. It will provide us new opportunities to tackle health inequalities and other social problems which put strain on our health service resources. As the Scottish Government confirms in its white paper, a yes vote will not affect current cross-border arrangements with health services in the rest of the UK, and the most recent national accounts of Scotland show that our national finances are in a healthier condition than the rest
Point
of
of
the UK.
information. But what about all the new public spending that they will have to be doing in an independent Scotland?
Well, we're going to get this from our new oil money, which, well, again, we'll have to get rid of Trident to find it, but once we've got it, we'll be able to continue spending. No thanks. But yeah, as I was saying, the most recent national accounts for Scotland show that our national finances are in a healthier condition than the rest of the UK, so we'll be able to afford better levels of spending on things like the NHS. So now I will tackle the points of clash. First, on the whole currency issue. The opposition has been saying that if we were to become part of the EU, we'd have to go to the euro. We're only being given the option to join the euro. We don't have to join the euro. If that was the case, no thanks. If that was the case, then Croatia would be using the euro, or Poland, or Hungary, or Romania. But they don't. They still have their own currency from when they joined. And I'd also like to bring up, it's interesting that they bring up the whole point about Ireland. Ireland became independent in 1922. That's over 90 years ago. They've gone down a path that has led them to their current crisis. As an independent Scotland, we will take a different path that is not based on austerity. It will be based on the needs of our people, and that will be prioritising the people who are normally hurt by austerity. Our money will go to the hospitals, it will go to the schools, it will go to the police, it will go to the pensioners. And they've also brought up a point about oil. Now, oil is not going to be our main source of finance. We're going to use it to invest in renewable energy. There are different places in Scotland that we can use for different sources of renewable energy. Solar power in the south, wind energy in the windy parts of the country, hydropower in the Western Islands. And if we do that, it will also remove our dependency on foreign oil, which lowers the trade deficit, which means the national debt that we will eventually and inevitably inherit will be much easier to tackle. And so to sum up, we believe that we have won this argument because we've shown how independence is good economically, socially and politically for the people of Scotland, and I urge you to propose this motion and show how we are better divorced.
Ladies and gentlemen, the year is 2025 and Scotland has changed. The oil market has crashed, leaving hundreds of thousands of Scottish people on the streets. The landscape has been stripped of its natural resources from fracking, and the sea has been ruined by deep-sea drilling and oil spills. This is all done desperately by a broken government trying to pay back its debts to the EU that it had to take to fund all the new and fantastic social policies that the proposition are suggesting we will have as an independent Scotland. So today I'll be looking at three main points of clash in this debate. Will future Scots benefit from a stronger economy? Will future Scots have more control over their government? And will future Scots have more influence internationally? To all of these, we answer no. So will future Scots benefit from a stronger economy? Well, we've seen a lot of talk here about how oil and investment from oil money will help us develop renewables and so on. The part of their logic that the proposition are missing is that to unlock all this oil, they need a lot of capital. Capital comes from investors who need a stable economy so that they can predict what was going to happen in it. In an independent, small nation, as my partner Mr. Booth has already talked about, small nations have unstable economies, that's not attractive to an investor. They will not be able to get the capital to unlock these vast oil reserves that supposedly exist, no thank you. Even if there are oil reserves to last 1,000 years, they won't have the capital to fund these oil reserves, to get a fund, such as Norway, that will last us for a long time, to invest in the renewables, which by the way will still need then more capital to fund, to get to the point where we can support ourselves without oil. It's just not going to happen, ladies and gentlemen. Small economies are too unpredictable. And seriously, if you look at Norway, their favourite example, they have all the potential for wave power and wind power as Scotland does, but they don't have this, renewable mecca of Europe, which is the best place to get renewable energy, and everybody goes there for energy, and this doesn't happen. They haven't attracted that investment, and Scotland will not attract that investment. Secondly, we see there's all this talk about the currency, and we just simply see that the EU has already said, plain and simply, if Scotland wants to get into the EU when it becomes independent, it needs to take the euro. That is the end of the matter. They decide that. It's not in Scotland's hands to choose if we want the EU or not, if we take the euro when we join the EU. The proposition talks about all the great things that the EU brings, and we completely agree. We think the EU is very good for trade in Scotland. We think that's absolutely essential for a small economy, and that's what I'm just going to look at right now and talk about our island example. So the nature of Scotland's economy is that it's small and it is based off inward investment from other nations and from international businesses, and it attracts them with low corporation tax and generally low taxes. Ireland has exactly the same model, and I think this defeats the point that we won't make the same decisions as Ireland, as we already are making the same decisions as Ireland, ladies and gentlemen. It's quite clear that we're in a very similar situation. And we see that what this has happened to Ireland is that when the 2008 financial crisis, when that international investment dried up, their economy completely fell apart, fell to pieces whatsoever. And as I already talked about, Scotland will need a lot of capital to invest in oil and so on, which is what will fall apart. And so we see that this lack of investment that will suddenly come will mean that Scotland will have to default on its debts, or it will have to make huge public spending cuts, which, like in Ireland, would be decided by the EU, which even with our 12 members of the EU Parliament, we're not going to have any control over it. It just doesn't matter. Having 12 members in the EU Parliament is like having a fly in a little box full of bajillions of flies. It's not important, ladies and gentlemen. It doesn't make a difference. When was the last time you heard Iceland having an important say in an EU decision? Would you not agree?
No, not quite exactly. Isn't it important though, although you're saying that these 12 MEPs, well, they're there, but they're not doing anything. They're representing Scotland, they're representing our interests.
Okay, thank you. So, will future Scots have more influence internationally? I've already touched on this just a little bit with my flies in a box example, but basically, no, they won't, because in a bigger country, as my partners have talked about, the G8 and the Security Council and so on, the UK can exert influence on things through trade agreements and so on. A small economy has to take what it's given, has to take the trade agreements that it's given, even if they're not beneficial, and it will ultimately result in Scotland being stripped of its natural resources, which I've already talked about. So, lastly, just very quickly, because I realise I'm kind of out of time, will future Scots have more control over their government? We've heard a lot about the social policies here, and we think that no, they won't, and as I've said, it will be because it's controlled by international bankers, by members of the EU Parliament from Brussels, so because future Scots won't be able to fund these amazing social policies on pensions and so on. We think it's a very good idea to have pensions that rise with inflation and so on, but it's just not going to happen when Scotland doesn't have any money and is forced to make cuts, such as the 10% cut to all public... No, thank you, you're out of time. The 10% cut to all public sector workers in Ireland. We think very similar things will happen to Scotland by 2025. So what have we told you today on the opposition? We think that Scotland will have a very unstable, small economy based on trade with the EU, which will have to take the euro to become part of. We think that dependence on the EU will ultimately lead to a lack of power for the Scottish people, because they will be controlled by the EU because they are dependent on it. We think that means that, and we also think that Scotland will have less influence internationally because they are smaller in general and have less leverage over other countries. Thank you.